Hi guys and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, this is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. Welcome to episode 6. Today I will be reading chapter 2 of my book, but I think a little perspective about the time period will help. It was the year 1994. Clinton was president, and the cost of living was a lot cheaper. Since then, it's tripled. The average income of $37,000 a year may seem a little low, but the average cost of a new house was only $119,000. Rent was about $533 a month. A cost of a gallon of gas was $1.09, and the movie ticket $4. And buying a new car was an affordable purchase at $12,000. It was the year when Lisa Marie Presley married Michael Jackson, the year that comic John Candy died, and the defining cultural moment for young people in Generation X when Kurt Cobain from the band Nirvana committed suicide. Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director that year, all while the first genetically engineered tomatoes were made available. It was the year genocidal civil war broke out in Rwanda, but it also marked the end of apartheid in South Africa. Their first multiracial election made Nelson Mandela the first democratically elected president, and yet later that year in America, O.J. Simpson was fleeing the police in his white Ford Bronco, a live car chase on TV that led to the trial of the century. But we were sheltered, and limitations based on class were real, which had a lot to do with how free one was to make choices such as traveling across the world to India. As awful as my trip ended up in the end, I'm truly happy I went to India when I did, because air travel was never the same, nor ever will be in our lifetimes. The golden age of flying was considered to be the 1950s and 60s, but flights were expensive, and that kind of experience was only had by the rich or higher classes. When flights were later made much more affordable, flying abroad was opened up to a new kind of passenger. So what was travel abroad like back in 1994? First, in order to book a ticket, you would have to visit a travel agent or call the airline directly over the phone. Then paper tickets would be mailed to you. I happened to know someone, a father of a dear friend in college, who set up the arrangements for me. Otherwise, I would not have known where to start. If you did not have a physical boarding pass, you could not board the plane. You needed a physical boarding pass because there was no electronic system. And yet, pre-September 11th, family and friends without boarding passes who weren't traveling themselves could actually go past the security gates with you and see you off as you boarded your flight. Security was a breeze. Pre-9/11, you could even bring water through security. The lines were no problem. You didn't have to arrive so early, and shoes and belts stayed on. You could take as many bags as you wanted and could take anything on board. And no body scans. Once on the flight, though, there was no seat-back entertainment. Of course, you could watch a movie on a big screen like a movie theater, or on various small clunky pop-down screens. But passengers did not have options to hundreds of movies or channels. You basically watched the movie the airline played, which were never the blockbuster titles, or you read a book. With no laptops in 1994, for my 24-hour trip to India, I brought plenty of hard copy to read. And while it may not have been terrific, there was free food and even free alcohol, included on almost every flight over 2 hours. Even coach and economy got free food, and hot meals served on trays. And there was even a non-packaged pillow and blanket waiting for passengers at every seat. And of course, there was the unthinkable. Smoking was allowed on flights until the 1990s, and it wasn't officially banned until 2000. But the convenience and freedom of travel was only part of the experience. Traveling in 1994 in another country meant you were on your own, because phones and the internet were non-existent. In 1984, the first bulky mobile phone cropped up on the scene, but it wasn't smart, and it was largely reserved for only top money-making businessmen, and it took 10 hours to charge for 30 minutes of talk time. By 1994, the first personal digital assistants, or PDAs, were coming out, which were the smartphones of their day, through which business people could share messages, something akin to email. But while we had word processors to write our papers in high school, the first website did not assemble until 1990. The public gained access to the internet in 1991, but people did not have the access immediately in their own homes. There were only internet libraries and later internet cafes, way before laptops. Because it wasn't until 1994 when Apple released the first Macintosh computers to use the new personal computer microprocessors. In 1994, America Online offered the gateway to the World Wide Web for the first time. And that year, the first search engine was created, Web Crawler. So it wasn't until 3 years later when Google finally arrived onto the scene. The same year, in 1997, the first weblog, or blog, was created. And finally, by 1999, the birth of mobile internet was launched. So with the ease of flying, there was a sense of freedom, yes. But the truth of it was, to travel to India in 1994 meant I was on my own. I took off to the Far East at just the point when if I waited only a few more years, it would have been a lot safer. I didn't seem to care, though, and that meant I was the most naive person alive. A 22-year-old girl with no phone or internet traveling across the planet. I still can't believe I made it out alive. But I was presented with a golden opportunity, which might not have been made available to me again. But it all started as an idea to expand into higher realms spiritually, and it was inspired by Roscoe. I didn't have anyone in my family or friends who had traveled to such a distant land. My parents got as far as Puerto Rico for their honeymoon. So working at the American Museum of Natural History was pivotal for me because I saw how travelers lived. I leaned on the expertise of the scientists there, for whom travel was part of their lives and research. And the rest is my crazy history. Please enjoy Chapter 2, right before I flew off to India. Chapter 2, The Scientific Library. It was impossible to persuade me to ditch my trip to India in 1994, although Roscoe, my work supervisor at the Scientific Library at the American Museum of Natural History, did a good job in trying. Roscoe saw me as impractical, lacking the discipline, discernment, and mental strength to successfully obtain enlightenment on my travels. He first introduced himself to me with an air of detached coolness, an attitude not common among librarians. "Hello there. I'm Roscoe Thompson. I'm the head reference guy around here." A black man of about 60 years, wearing a mustache that curved down the sides of his mouth, shaded wired glasses, and an Art Deco tie. He looked me up and down with intelligent eyes, and with nonchalance he said, "So you know Dewey Decimal?" "Yes." "Well, this job I think you can handle." I sensed from the start that he had lived a rich life beyond that of a stuffy librarian. His confidence was striking. He wasn't arrogant, just certain of himself in the world. He knew things, and he appeared to have a broad scope of life experience. In time, I discovered that he had been a beatnik in Paris, a civil rights activist in the 1960s, and an art collector in Africa. But he had originally started as a chemist. A black chemist in the 50s? Nobody ever heard of such a thing. Me and my assistants used to play pranks on new clients who came into the lab. They would go right by me to my white assistant and say, "Mr. Thompson?" And he would say, "No, this is Mr. Thompson," and point to me. And I would turn around nice and easy and say, "Yes, hello, I am black and I am a chemist. Can I help you?" He laughed heartily in that deep, throaty voice. "No, I'm only joking with you. The point is, they're all crazy out there. It's a cold world. They crush all who have the power to bring sunlight to it." "So why did you leave?" I asked him. "I compromised myself for 5 years in that chemistry lab. Objectively speaking, it was a great job. Got up one day and left. Went to Africa for 15 years, smoked lots of hash, and met lots of people. And I sold that art. Great African art. Auctioned it off in America and made lots of money. That place. Now that was the real world. All this foolishness around here, this isn't real. My question to you is, with everything that is out there, why do you choose to stay cooped up in here?" Because I like to walk through the museum on the way to work. When I pass those huge elephants through the North American Mammals Hall, I visualize my ride on a safari one day, breathing in the spirit of the land just as Hemingway had. He laughed at my romantic speech. You is crazy like the rest of them, girl. And those dinosaurs, oh, those dinosaurs, with those Teddy Roosevelt quotes on the walls behind them. Only those are fit to live who do not fear to die, and none are fit to die who have shrunken from the joy of life and the duty of life. Ah, so inspiring. So you dig all that hogwash. Jeez, you are naive, Roscoe said. The problem with Teddy is that he was a savage imperialist slob, a man with a typical American dream appetite, who ate up all that stood in his way. Maybe so, but he had good quotes, I said. And his cousin Frankie wasn't any better, Roscoe continued. Damn fool made us creatures of the clock. He envisioned a driving force of new labor to save us from the economic crisis, and ended up with an enslaved class of robots with no damn creativity, working only for work's sake. Nonsensical foolishness of capitalism. Roscoe stood out so much from everybody else in the library that it was almost comical, and he knew it. Look here, everyone coming in and out of this place, they're crazy. They don't know anything about anything, you know. I was just talking to one of the scientists in the back. He asked me what my religion was, and I said, nothing, nada, rien. And he said, I saw a Holocaust documentary on PBS the other night, and what struck me is why didn't the Catholic Church ever get involved? I mean, if the church is so great, why didn't they stop it? It's beyond me. And I stood there, and I stared at him, and I thought to myself, boy, you are one stupid motherfucker. I always found myself laughing at his stories with a hot rush of red through my cheeks like a star-struck groupie. Roscoe was my wise friend who gave me the insight I could never have acquired on my own as a sheltered white girl from suburbia. On one occasion, Roscoe stormed in and threw what looked like a term paper across the circulation desk. Look at this. That crazy person that comes in here from off the street and calls himself a doctor left this here yesterday for me to proofread. Read it. It was titled, A New Technology Based on the Evolution's Theory of the Living Beings, Its Implications for Haiti. There wasn't much written research, and what was there was grammatically flawed, but what struck me most were the numerous sloppy bar diagrams of tourism rates in 4 Latin American countries, bar diagram of consummation of paper goods in 5 Latin American countries. What does this have to do with evolution? I asked. Don't you see he's crazy? They come to libraries to feel. They are lonely and desperate and have only read books their whole lives. They long for friends. They want the people in libraries to be their imaginary friends. Finally, they go insane and preoccupy their crazy minds with this hogwash. They think they're contributing to some silly intellectual cause, but after a while, nothing fits anymore. You see then how important following your emotions is? I would challenge him. But Roscoe stuck to reason above all else. Yes, but it is often important to critique oneself. One must always check oneself so as not to become this. I survey the room of busy readers with neatly greased hair and far-off gazes in their eyes. And some have it, and some do not. That is the sadness of the human condition. And there is nothing you can do. He grunted with finality. He pointed to one of our regular patrons with the Rip Van Winkle beard, who never spoke nor looked at anybody. You see that guy? That man is crazy, and he's a racist. He's taken that Races of Men book out by Robert Knox about 9 times, and now he's reading up on Samuel George Morton's craniometry bullshit. That pseudoscience of physiognomy and eugenics shit will make your brain sick and evil. Samuel George Morton was regarded as the father of American physical anthropology, whose work was favored by the same folk who advocated slavery. Morton was heavily influenced by the 19th century school of thought in physiognomy, assessing a person's character from one's outer appearance, especially the face, as well as the quack science of phrenology, the practice of observing the shape and size of skulls to determine a person's inherent traits within, such as personality and the potential for criminality. Writer, humorist, and political dissenter Mark Twain scorned the field through his satire and held lifelong doubt about the soundness of its theories, fully aware of its flaws and assumptions. Morton believed that the size of cranial capacity determined intellectual ability, and he used his craniometric evidence to favor a racial hierarchy, which put Caucasians on the top rung and Africans on the bottom. Based on his skull measurements, he claimed in his Crania Americana that the Caucasians had the biggest brains, Indians were in the middle, and Negroes had the smallest brains. He concluded from this that Caucasians had the highest intellectual endowments, Native Americans were restless and slow in acquiring knowledge, and Africans were indolent with the intellectual capabilities of the lowest grade of humanity. I had come across many books on scientific racism in those sealed-off, air-conditioned stacks, set at just the right temperature to preserve its oldest and most fragile pages, some dating back to the 1700s. Each time they were requested, I snuck peeks inside and did not have a cozy feeling afterward. I had also given Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species a little more reading, or its original full title, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Published in 1859, Darwin documented microevolution in his study of finches and showed over the course of time how a species slowly physically adapts through generations. In this microevolution, we see the production of variation within gene pools, populations, and species. In real time, microevolution is difficult to detect, but over long periods of time, according to evolutionists, these small microevolutionary changes ultimately lead to macroevolution of entire species. But species jumping, or the natural selection of an entire species or subspecies, was not well supported with evidence. So it was the macroevolutionary branch of concept I rejected that I like to call ape theory, or the idea that we all share a last common ancestor in a family of primates. Darwin's origin did not include any mention of the idea of the human animal or our descent from apes. These ideas were developed later on by his peers and followers. The public evolutionary debate in response to his work was essentially about human origins. Parallel to Darwin's expeditions, imperialist Europeans were conquering the territory of indigenous peoples around the world and were convinced of the white man's burden, or their moral obligation to refine the savages of the world. Darwin's theory was the scientific explanation to the long-held belief that characteristics in certain human groups were more advanced than in other groups evolutionarily. Clearly what they believed all along about other races in their explorations. It all made perfect sense to these early naturalists that man had not only evolved from apes, but was still currently evolving in front of their very eyes, as demonstrated by the underdeveloped African pygmies right up to the more advanced races of the Aryans and Brits, who were at the top of the evolutionary pyramid. And with this main assumption and starting premise, the white man went to great lengths to prove his own genetic superiority. Today, no one in any intellectual circle in science or in academia, both of which I was immersed in at the museum, can escape supporting the multitude of theories under the canopy of evolution as absolute fact, as it's practically worshipped as gospel. So wholeheartedly convinced in one man's claim, the dogmatic trust natural history scientists have in Darwin's theories, regardless of the missing link anomaly, resembles that of religion, competing in popularity with even Jesus. No other theory has ever influenced as many schools of thought, spawning countless professions along the way, resurrecting an entire academic world that would be impossible to break down, even if there were tons of evidence to its contradiction. Perhaps I was naive in hoping my ancestors were people over pond scum, but the museum would never have any such talk, else it'd be labeled heretical. The frigid New York City winter crept upon us, bringing with it the heavy melancholy that rears its ugly head in the dreary absence of warm sunlight. In but a season's time, what began as a whimsical stroll through an archaeological adventure zone was now a numbing roam through the dusty collections of ancient quests irrelevant to my personal philosophical concerns. Roscoe and I now ranted together in unison, and luckily the humor got me through the day. Dreaming about my trip to India coming up in March was the one saving grace preventing my mind from turning into mush. On one snowy day, the quiet stillness of the library was deafening. There's a collective sleeping consciousness here, Roscoe. You're finally seeing it. I've always seen it, but I've ignored it. They walk in and out of here with titles of accomplishment because they've adopted the appropriate belief system and the suitable jargon. But do any of them think for themselves? Do any of them go with what they feel? They're trying to crush me, you know. In order for them to have power or feel safe around me, they must crush me. Of course. They're dead weight. Not one of them has an idea in their heads that wasn't put there by some dogma of society. And that's how most people are. You must put up with it. They're everywhere. But humans have the ability to change if they want to, don't they? I asked in earnest. It's not futile to try to rise to another level. People can only analyze through their minds, said Roscoe. Some minds see more than others. But you're not looking at potentials in people. We are all becoming. What about those who claim to have reached enlightenment, like in India? Don't you believe that's possible to achieve? You've sought after it in your travels, haven't you? What I know is this, that it's a very hard thing to capture. If you're lucky, you'll catch a glimpse of it. But time moves on. Everything is in flux. And then there's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. One can never be sure if in that moment in time one was right about their judgment of enlightenment. Yeah, but don't you think that some things transcend time and space? Some things are temporal, and some things are eternal. There is nothing beyond this, Jen. I've traveled the world. This is all there is. I'm sorry, but I believe in such things, and only in believing in them do I have even a small chance of finding them. And I won't be told by you it doesn't exist. It's reality. Well, it doesn't have to be my reality. Look, you can't change it, Roscoe contended. We tried in the 60s. The revolution is over. We've accepted the misery, and the ones who weren't crushed have at least learned to be free. Ah, listen to Ayn Rand. What are you seeking? Freedom. To want nothing, to expect nothing, to depend on nothing. Roscoe, she was an angry capitalist who worshipped the rational mind as her god. Reason alone without emotion makes the world a whole lot colder. Ideally, we want both realms of emotion and intellect to expand in society, right? And when this finally happens, one day, mark my words, there'll be another renaissance. Roscoe stared at me and took a long pause and then answered in perfect timing. Honey, if you think this dreary world is heading toward a renaissance, you've got another thing coming. His raspy laugh punctuated his comment. Girl, you have been doing too many of those psychedelics. When are you going to write something down and get it published in Cosmology Today? My point of view makes no sense to you? Where? Out there in the real world or between us in conversation? Roscoe chuckled. I relented. What I believe is that the emotional realm, that space where dreams live, where the heart pulsates, that is the only thing that is real to me. Jen, one cannot know an abstract thing in itself as it really is, he started. You cannot really know for sure about that space because we cannot know anything subjective for sure. For something to be truly known, it must first be experienced and then measured by some standard. That, my friend, is what reason is. In all other areas, we only see limitations to true understanding. But how do you know for sure? I asked. How do I know? He said with furrowed brow attitude. Do I look like every other stupid motherfucker walking around here? I know because I've lived it. Let me say this to you. I know there isn't anything here. It's all out there. You're right to want to venture forth. But are you ready? I'm traveling to India to seek personal transformation, Roscoe. I'm ready to meet God. Roscoe often looked at me as though I had just said the most amusingly naive comment he had ever heard, but tried with all his power to stifle his laughter because we were in a library. My dear, as Nietzsche said, God is dead. Roscoe, God is love, and he's within. We all have a link to him, just as we are all made up of the same atoms that make up the world and the universe. The expression on his face changed from mocking to contemplative, and he said, You know, truth, God. The whole thing came to me quite often in those days in Africa. When we sat around that fire sharing stories and hash, we edged enlightenment too. I knew the cosmos so accurately I could taste it. It was all so clear to me. I talk like you do. I saw the patterns and relationships you want to see. But then they get you in the end. They beat you down. He paused, took off his glasses, and rubbed his tired eyes. He continued, Yeah, Paris in the early 50s was something, too. I sat in the cafe for hours and bullshit. People thought I was born in France. My accent was so good. That was something. We all had fun there. I'm really following some kind of inner calling, Roscoe. I'm not just doing this impulsively, even though it may appear that way. Maybe so. But I still don't know if you're ready. With serious eyes, he leaned across the circulation desk and spoke as if revealing something confidential. You see, there are two types of people in this world. There are the people who think only about the monster, and there are those who don't. I met so many of those monster people. They're evil and they're crazy. Their egos are atrocious. They are ruled by their monster. And many of them were sitting right around that fire with me. You'll also come across them in areas of India. But unlike you, when I visited Africa, I had enough information. And I don't believe you are there yet. I listened intently and remained quiet, but I must have looked dumb, so he continued in a gentler tone. Let me put it to you in a way you'll understand. You don't know enough translation, and that means a transformation that should come your way may be more dangerous than you think. You still don't have enough stuff to process it, and it'll hurl you into a dark place. You'll meet your spirit and may not like what you see. That's called the shadow, and that meeting can be spiritually debilitating. His tone disturbed me a little, but overall I wrote off Roscoe's warnings as alarmist. Roscoe, I have to do this. Something is guiding me there. And then, with much less intensity and with his usual carefree tone, he drew himself back coolly and said, Just be careful what you wish for, because the world around you will cease to make sense if you're not ready for the turning point. Don't wander too far out of your zip code. Roscoe, not all who wander are lost. My invitation to India came from my old college friend Summit. Despised by most of his peers, he was practically Indian nobility and had the spoiled manner and air of entitlement as one born a prince. He looked different from other Silicon nerd Indians I took code with in college, rather tall with a broad yet sleek swimmer's build, and with an attitude of indifference. He always wore an arrogant, pompous smirk. He was so quick to call a person an idiot in such a matter-of-fact and nonchalant way that it appeared that, indeed, he was an authority on the matter. A snob by all measure, he held the carriage of self-assuredness in the belief that nothing was out of his reach, the kind that comes with high breeding, the kind I never dared indulge in, given my working-class background. I was determined to find out what his exact opposite upbringing instilled in him that was lacking in me, that tone of authority, that sense of certainty. Summit had an open dislike for much of what America stood for, and expounded endlessly upon its inferiority. Americans are too attached to individualism, he'd huff with boredom. That's your problem. You're arrogant, and everyone in the world knows it. When you add up each American together as a community, it's not very impressive. I did not trust Summit. But when he offered me the opportunity to escape from New York to see the other side of the world, I hopped on it without hesitation, and I never did look back. And so, with only a little cash in my pocket, I believed I would manage just fine taking the backpacking man's journey, roughing it out in small motels and eating cheap food along the way. I was confident that Indian currency was so desperately low in value, at 44 rupees to $1 American dollar in 1994, that I could make it on a small amount of pocket change without a hitch. A week before the flight, Roscoe invited me to his one-bedroom apartment on the 6th floor of a sleek brownstone building on the Upper East Side. His living space was filled with African decor, masks, tribal weapons, and headdresses. His abode spoke volumes about who he was and what he had seen. Roscoe, this place is amazing, I mused aloud upon entering. It's what I did. I guess it's a big part of who I am, he said with a modest and healthy pride. He sat down on a soft and worn, heavily textured and patterned couch with earthy colors and bold geometric designs. I sat opposite him in a lumpy oxblood leather chair, the kind that possesses the wear of true character. He clasped his hands and began. Okay, now, let's talk. You want to do this, good. The desire is important. Now, stop this head in the cloud stuff and get real. Get practical. Watch for charlatans. They look for people like you. They prey on them. Don't be so stupid. Not everyone is so nice. Then he handed me a palm-sized brown leather case and said, the firmest warning I can give you is to have caution about the food. Don't eat out of the locals' pots. Don't eat street vendor food. And don't eat any raw vegetables. It could kill you. I opened the case, and inside was a metal fork and a knife. They were scratched up and lightweight. These are the set of utensils I had with me all throughout Africa. I passed them on to you. I was so touched I thought I might cry. You got all your shots, right? He asked. Yes. Okay, bring water pills, the kind that dissolve in hot water to purify all the stuff that you don't want in your system, and banana chips and kaopectate. You'll thank me when the shit hits. We talked some more, but Roscoe intended the visit to be speedy, to keep it comfortable and light. When I was exiting his warm home, filled with the pulsing stories and authentic memories of a true world trekker, he said, Jen, just use your head. Think. As Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Well, he was only half right. I also feel, therefore I am. Roscoe gave me a side smile and looked at me like I was a little kid who said something cute. You know the Marxist term praxis? I shook my head no. It means the integration of your practice with your belief system. You have a strong belief system, Jen. You have to go get some praxis. Good luck in India. And with that, I felt graced with his sincere blessing. I thought carefully about his advice, but I couldn't for a moment imagine that this grand expedition would be thrown off by something as petty as diarrhea. Like the monks of long ago, stepping onto their pilgrimage, with a clearness of mind, a trusting heart, and a calm expectancy, I ventured forth on faith alone into the unknown land of India. End of chapter 2. Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.